2020 is now tied for the deadliest year in Kansas City history. 153 fathers, mothers, daughters, sons, and friends have lost their lives due to violence this year.
This morning, Kansas City Mayor Quinton Lucas joining us live on the phone to talk about where we go from here. Mayor Lucas, good morning. Thank you for your time. I don't mean for this to be a point the finger kind of question here, because you have called this number and this stat a personal and professional failure in the past. But is there an issue you consider to be the most responsible for this trend, or more responsible than others, because there are lots that can point to what's happening? Is there one that you say is possibly the worst?
I think that probably the most significant issue with which we deal is gun violence in our city. There are a lot of folks, felons in possession and others, who are not even lawfully allowed to carry firearms. That is a crime just when they have them. They're passing them around, in many cases, to young people who are also not allowed to have firearms. And we're seeing that every dispute is being resolved with guns, most situations handguns, and we are seeing the very negative results of that.
Mayor, let's talk about legislation. I mean, both at the state and federal level, are there laws that you would enact if you could bring this number down?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, Missouri had reasonable laws relating to concealed weapons, just probably 5 or 6 years ago. Right now, we've gotten to a situation where if the police stop a car in Kansas City, and even if it seems as if everyone has no business with an AR-15, all that sort of stuff, they can't do a follow-up, can't ask, because of the looseness that we have with a lot of our gun regs. I mean, I'm not saying that it's guns alone, but when you look at the number of people who've been murdered by firearm this year, well over 90% of our homicides, then you start to say, why can't we just have things that separate responsible gun owners, of which there are many, from the many folks that should not be walking around with them in Kansas City, in Missouri, and Kansas today, this weekend, terrorizing not just KCMO, but throughout the region.
Mr. Mayor, 2020 does not set out by itself. This is the year we've tied the record, and more than likely will break the record, but it's not by itself. Last year there was, I believe, 151. In fact, there's only been one year in the last decade with fewer than 100 homicides. You have talked about, and other politicians have talked about, the goal of being that under 100 mark. Is that even attainable anymore, to be under 100 homicides in Kansas City in a calendar year?
I do believe that. If you look at it, it's a city that's of a very different size, but in the early 1990s, New York City had 2,000 plus homicides every year. Now they're in the 200s. They're going to have an increase this year, but probably back to something like 300. If they can drop 1,700 murders, then I have to believe that there is a way that we can do this. It's going to take work from every part of local government. That includes looking at prevention and root causes of violent crime. That includes looking at different employment opportunities, and that it does have a real conversation about what enforcement needs to look like. While you can't enforce your way out of the problem, you do need to make sure that we actually have a clearance rate. We're solving homicides, solving non-fatal shootings, so that folks know that there will be justice met to them if they cause harm in their community.
Speaking of, having those calls coming in, having those tips for folks that can call, we display that number on our screen all the time, 816-474-TIPS. And there have been repeated calls for the removal of Police Chief Rick Smith. How much is a lack of trust in police playing a role in this number?
I think a lack of trust in the police certainly is significant in how we solve crimes, but that is a problem that predates Chief Rick Smith, that predates a lot of our issues. There's been certain music around for decades now where they've talked about don't trust the police or all types of things. And so that's something that we have to try to work through every day. We have to make sure that we're recruiting more diverse police officers. We have to make sure that we are individually, with each officer in Kansas City, and certainly from the local government side, working to bridge divides that have long separated particularly our police and certain members of some of our communities. And so that is something that we have to work on continually. But as I've said a number of different times, personnel change does not make sustainable change. Never in history has changing one person caused a great and fundamental difference to an institution. And so I think what we need to see is how can we actually address our many issues long term, address root causes, and make it so that we're building a police department people in the community feel safer and more comfortable talking to and working with.
Mr. Mayor, before we let you go this morning, we hear from our viewers all the time that we talk too much about bad news. That's all we talk about. That's the reason people say they don't watch the news anymore, because it's all bad. We know this is not good news this morning to tie that record of 153 homicides in a calendar year. You've just come out with a plan in the last month that had 4 pillars there of things you're trying to do. Is there any bit of hope you can offer to our viewers this morning about turning the corner here? You mentioned those numbers in New York dropping over the course of time. Is there something you see from your office that offers a little bit of hope that this can get better, if anything?
We've seen success before. The fact that we did see a dip pretty much in the earlier part of the last decade tells me that there are things you can do, and there are trends that can be better for us too. Sometimes it is just reflective of national trends, and I think right now you're seeing crime spikes throughout the country. But no, I absolutely believe that by working with prevention and intervention, particularly with our young people, getting them to carry firearms less from that early age, and importantly, stopping that retaliatory cycle that we see in a lot of our shootings, we can make a difference. I will note it won't be tomorrow. It may take months. It may take years. But I do believe that we can make that difference.
Mayor Quinton Lucas, Kansas City, joining us this morning, the day after we tie the record for homicides in a single calendar year in Kansas City at 153, offering his thoughts. Mr. Mayor, thank you for your time this morning. We appreciate it.